Tom Carver never trusted flying in the big machines. Crop dusters, those he understood. They were honest aircraft. Simple throttle, metal bones, a growl from the engine that you could feel in your spine. You smelled the earth as you skimmed it, traced every dip and contour of your land like reading the story of your own home. But a commercial jet, sealed tight like a pressurized tin can, soaring higher than any man should comfortably be. He could never shake the feeling that once things went wrong up there, there was no pulling over to the side of the road. The sky didn't give second chances. Seat 14A, right over the wing. His wife always said the wings were the safest place, closest to the structure, strongest part of the plane. But if you asked Tom, it just meant you were the first to notice when something went bad. The flight attendant smiled too much, overcompensating. It was a routine flight from Chicago to Omaha. Families heading home after holiday visits, business travelers flipping through spreadsheets, a couple in first class clinking champagne glasses to celebrate engagement. Nothing unusual, nothing that warned how quickly normal could shatter. Tom stared out the window, watching the farmlands shrink into patchwork squares of brown and gold. His hometown wasn't visible, he knew that, but still felt like somewhere below him. The fields he once tended were stretching under the sun, tractors crawling like beetles across the soil. Home, he was almost home. A little girl in the seat across the aisle peeked over her tablet and whispered to her mother, "Mommy, the plane is shaking." Turbulence. Annoying but ordinary. The captain's voice chimed through the speakers, casual as if ordering a coffee. "Just a little rough air ahead, folks. Nothing to worry about." Tom closed his eyes. He'd heard that line before, right before he and his father hit a downdraft over Miller's farm and nearly clipped a silo. Pilots didn't announce concern, they swallowed it. He gripped the armrest. Then came the sound. A clawing metallic screech like the plane itself was being ripped apart. Heads snapped up, drinks spilled, luggage rattled in the overhead bins. The right engine coughed once, then detonated in a fireball so bright it painted the cabin in flickering orange light. Gasps and shrill screams erupted around him. The aircraft lurched violently to the right, shuddering as if swatted by a giant hand. The little girl's tablet flew from her grasp. A man near the back vomited from the sudden drop. The mother secured her child's head against her chest, eyes wild with fear. Before anyone could process what just happened, boom! The left engine followed, a deafening blast that shook the aluminum shell like thunder striking bone. Flames spewed from beneath the wing and then, terrifyingly, went out. Both engines died within seconds. Then silence. A silence so absolute it felt unnatural, like the sky itself was holding its breath. The cabin lights flickered and dimmed. The nose of the aircraft sagged, dipping toward the earth. Gravity reclaimed them quickly, violently. Oxygen masks deployed in a frantic cascade, serpents unfurling from the ceiling. A delayed chorus of shocked gasps, the thin whooshing sound of air replacing panic. People fumbled and screamed, unable to connect the latches with trembling fingers. Tom yanked his mask down and inhaled sharply. Acrid smoke tinged the air, stinging his throat. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. Frantic, unsteady, the calm veneer stripped away. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost thrust in both engines." There it was, the truth pilots hoped they'd never speak aloud. Tom's pulse hammered. Without thrust, a plane of this size wasn't flying, it was gliding, and poorly. They had minutes at most before gravity finished its sentence. The plane shimmied violently as air roared past dead turbines. The cabin tilted downward, revealing the brown river threading through farmland far below. So small from here. Too small. Tom forced his air-starved lungs to slow. Panic wasted focus. And at 35,000 feet, clarity was survival. He scanned the cabin. 70 feet back, 155 souls scattered like fragile glass, most unaware how few options remained. A teenage boy sobbed into his hoodie. A businessman clenched his phone, muttering, I love you, over and over into the voicemail abyss. Flight attendants tried to steady sprawling arms and desperate minds, but fear was contagious, pandemic in seconds. The loudest sound now was the soft whimpering prayers of strangers facing a single shared truth. They might be living their final moments. Tom released his grip on the armrest long enough to wipe sweat from his palms. His hands, the same ones that had once confidently maneuvered a crop duster through razor-thin wind tunnels between barns and trees, were trembling. He'd been here before. Different plane, different stakes, but the same gut-deep certainty. If the pilot didn't act fast, there wouldn't be a second chance. His training wasn't fancy. His days in the Air Force never came. Life had kept him on the ground, tending family fields instead of chasing military glory. But flying was in his marrow. He could feel an aircraft's condition the way farmers sensed a storm coming. And right now, this plane was dying. The cockpit door was slightly ajar, maybe knocked loose by the shockwave of the explosions. Tom glimpsed the silhouettes of the flight crew, two figures hunched over controls that were failing them, alarms beeping with growing urgency. The captain's next announcement was barely audible. We're attempting to restart, stand by. Attempting, not succeeding. Tom unbuckled his seatbelt. Sir, a flight attendant barked, her voice cracking, you must remain seated. But Tom ignored her. His gaze stayed locked on that cracked-open cockpit door, the closest thing to control in this spinning metal tomb. He knew what came next if nobody took decisive action. He'd studied enough crash reports to know engine flameouts after a bird strike rarely ended well, not without altitude, runway, or systems intact. He steadied himself as the plane dipped through a cloud layer, trailing eerie silence. The ground loomed larger now, patches of farmland sharpening into reality. Every instinct screamed at him. Do something now. He stumbled forward, gripping seatbacks to stay upright against the tilt. Panic washed around him, but he tuned it out. He had survived tractor accidents, tornadoes, and a plane stall when he was just 19. Each time, instinct had guided him. His boots braced as another jolt rocked the fuselage. He was close enough now to hear the chaos on the flight deck, buttons slapping, warnings blaring, terror in the pilots, frantic breathing. He didn't knock, he didn't ask permission. He pushed the cockpit door fully open. Two pairs of eyes snapped toward him, wide, desperate, silently begging for an answer they could not find. The captain's hands hovered uselessly over the dead throttles. And in that carved-out moment of suspended reality, wind whistling like a predator outside the windows, Tom Carver understood. No one else on this aircraft knew flying like he did. No one else had practiced forced landings in a near-weightless glide. No one else had spent a lifetime mastering survival in the sky. This wasn't the captain's fault. It wasn't training or skill lacking, just cruel circumstance. But right now, this plane needed a farmer. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word left him, the aircraft dropped suddenly, hard enough to throw him against the instrument panel. The captain grabbed the yoke, shouting over the alarms. We're losing her. Tom's hand clawed for balance as gravity yanked them toward the earth below. And with every second, those fields, his fields, rushed closer. Too close. Too fast. Too late. Unless he acted now, Tom Carver's voice barely rose above the roar of the engine sputtering into silence. I can help, he said, his tone calm but commanding, like the wind cutting through wheat, sharp, precise, and unflinching. The captain froze, her hands hovering over the throttles. Panic flashed across her face, a mirror to every passenger in the cabin, but her training struggled against instinct. Protocol dictated no unqualified civilians in the cockpit. Authority dictated that she remain in control. But the plane was dying, and the ground was coming to meet them faster than anyone could measure. "I'm serious," Tom insisted, stepping closer, boots scraping against the metal floor. "I know how to fly. I've done this before." Her eyes flicked at him, searching for any indication he wasn't lying or insane. Seconds passed like eternities. Somewhere behind them, a toddler screamed, a woman wailed, and the intercom was filled with panicked announcements that only made the chaos worse. The first officer's hands trembled over the yoke. Sweat ran down his forehead, stinging his eyes. The aircraft lurched violently, and the seats rattled as if reminding them of their fragility. "Fine," the captain finally barked, snapping against the weight of fear and necessity. "Step up, but follow instructions. One wrong move and—" her words trailed off. The threat was unspoken but palpable. Tom didn't hesitate. He moved into the cockpit, gripping the yoke, feeling the cold, vibrating metal thrumming under his palms. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, listening, not to the alarms, not to the screaming, but to the plane itself. It shuddered, strained, and whispered a language only someone who'd lived in the air could understand. He opened his eyes. Below them, the countryside stretched out in a mosaic of gold and brown. Rivers, roads, and tree lines blurred into speed lines of impending danger. The plane tilted again, wings dipping dangerously toward the ground. Tom's stomach flipped as he realized how little room they had. "We won't make it to the airport," Tom said, voice cutting over the alarms. "The engines are dead, there's no thrust. We glide or we die." The first officer swallowed, disbelief etched into his face. You've never flown this plane before." "I've flown worse," Tom replied. "Just trust me." Above them, the sky was a pale, unforgiving blue, but the earth below was a violent blur. Farmers' fields raced beneath, rivers gleaming like silver snakes winding through the terrain. The plane's nose pitched down slightly, the cabin vibrating with the terrifying clarity of freefall. Tom's mind raced. He needed a landing spot. The nearest airport was miles away, unreachable. Roads were narrow, lined with vehicles and power lines. Trees would shred the fuselage. Houses would transform the aircraft into a missile. And then he saw it. A river, wide, calm, straight, accessible. The one that curved lazily through farmland, just like the one he grew up beside, the one he fished from as a boy, the one that had always whispered promises of life even when storms tore across the plains. He pointed. "There, that river, it's the only chance." The captain's eyes widened. "A river? Are you insane?" "Better than hitting houses, better than ending up in a field that'll crumple this fuselage like paper," Tom snapped, voice firm. "We go there or we die. Your call." Behind them, passengers screamed, unaware of the decision unfolding in inches and seconds. Drinks spilled, children cried, and the cabin seemed to tilt in anticipation, almost sentient with the fear of what was about to happen. The plane pitched again. Tom felt the metal groan beneath his fingers, every ton of aluminum and steel bending against gravity's pull. The wings flexed, dangerously low. "We've got to keep her level," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Or we're done." "Level?" the captain asked, disbelief heavy in her voice. "Yes, keep her level. Watch the bank of the river. Don't overcorrect, trust me." Seconds later, another violent jolt threw Tom against the instrument panel. His fingers barely held onto the yoke. He saw the curve of the river approaching, reflecting sunlight like molten silver. The bank was sharp in places, trees lining the edges like jagged teeth. One wrong move, and they'd roll, cartwheel, explode. The first officer's hands shook. How can you know?" "Because I know the air," Tom said simply. "I know the machines, and I know how to survive when they want to kill you." Behind him, a man pressed against the window, screaming. A woman sobbed, clutching her child. Every second was a pulse in the chest of everyone on board, and the plane itself seemed to hesitate, as if considering whether to obey or let gravity have its way. Tom's eyes darted to the altimeter, too low, too fast. He adjusted the flaps, feeling the tension in the controls. The aircraft responded slowly, reluctantly. Hydraulics groaned. Warnings blared. Smoke filtered from the panel, metal screeched. The river had never looked so far, yet somehow it was the only lifeline. He caught a glimpse of the pilots' faces, pale, desperate. He didn't look away. "Focus," he barked. "Eyes outside, watch the water, stay calm. One mistake and it's over. Do you hear me?" "Yes," the captain whispered, voice trembling, but the acknowledgement was enough. The plane's descent accelerated. The ground was a living thing, rushing up like the jaws of a predator. Tom forced himself to remain calm, repeating the process in his head. Glide angle, flaps, rudder, nose, attitude. Minute adjustments, each critical, each second multiplying the margin of survival. He could feel the panic of the cabin like a weight on his shoulders, the tension crawling through him, freezing muscles he didn't know were tense. Children were screaming. Adults were screaming. Even the flight attendants, trained for this, were close to hysteria. Tom's jaw tightened. He adjusted the nose slightly, avoiding a low tree line along the riverbank. The plane groaned and shuddered as water came into sight, widening below them. A fishing dock, abandoned in winter frost, blurred past. Ducks scattered. The river rippled, seemingly waiting. "Hold on," he muttered. "We're coming in hot." The captain's eyes widened, not with fear but recognition. She had flown planes in her life, controlled disasters, handled emergencies, but nothing prepared her for the skill, instinct, and raw courage required for what they were about to attempt. The first officer's grip on the yoke was white-knuckled, but he followed Tom's guidance. Every move was delicate. One wrong flick of the controls and the aircraft would flip, crash, or break apart. The passengers, still unaware of the plan, screamed louder as turbulence hit. Gusts of wind buffeted the fuselage like invisible fists. Tom gritted his teeth, fighting the instinct to panic. The river was all that mattered now. The river, and keeping these 155 souls alive long enough to touch it. And as the aircraft dropped lower, the trees lining the bank rose like jagged teeth, closer than any safety margin allowed. Tom realized. Even a perfect landing wasn't guaranteed. The river wasn't a runway, the water wasn't forgiving, but it was the only choice, the only one. And Tom knew, deep in his bones, that if he failed here, there would be no second chance. Tom Carver's hands gripped the yoke like he was holding the lives of everyone on board, and in truth he was. The river stretched below, a glimmering ribbon of silver snaking between frozen farmland and barren trees. It was narrower than any runway, its edges lined with driftwood, reeds, and winter debris. One miscalculation could send the aircraft rolling, flipping, or shattering into the ice-cold water. The plane pitched violently, a shudder running through every rivet and panel. "Hold her steady," Tom muttered under his breath. The cockpit's alarms screamed at them, engine fire warnings, hydraulic failure, altitude alerts, but he blocked them out. Outside the windows, the horizon tilted, and the farmland blurred into streaks of brown and gray. Every passenger's life hung on the thin thread of his experience. "Too low, adjust," the captain shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Tom's eyes were on the river, scanning for any imperfections, rocks, branches, docks, or sudden bends. His brain calculated angles, descent speed, and glide path in milliseconds. The left wing dipped slightly toward the bank. He yanked back on the yoke, muscles burning. The plane groaned in protest, but it straightened. He could hear the screams of children, the prayers of desperate adults, the metallic clatter of overhead bins shaking. Every ounce of chaos reinforced the urgency of the moment. The plane's tail dipped dangerously. Another gust of wind caught them. Tom fought instinct against instinct. The farmer in him wanted to duck and brace for collision, but the pilot in him knew that panicking now would kill them all. "Flaps," he barked. "Full flaps, maximum control." The first officer followed the instructions, fingers trembling on the levers. The plane slowed, but not enough. Ice-cold dread crawled up Tom's spine. Below, the river curved sharply, lined with trees that looked like jagged knives from this altitude. One wrong move and the wings would catch a branch, tearing through the fuselage. Tom focused. He had seen smaller planes survive impossible water landings, but nothing like this. The weight of 155 souls pressed down on him. He could almost hear their hearts pounding in unison, feel the collective fear vibrating through the metal. The plane dipped again. Spray from the river sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting off the cracked windows. Tom's teeth clenched. He adjusted the rudder slightly, coaxing the plane back to parallel with the river's current. The current below wasn't violent, but it wasn't forgiving either. Hitting at the wrong angle could send the fuselage spinning like a toy. A sudden lurch threw him against the controls. The plane tilted dangerously to the left. He corrected immediately, but the cockpit filled with a harsh, metallic groan. The first officer swallowed audibly, clearly terrified. "Steady," Tom muttered. "We're not dead yet, not on my watch." The river widened slightly, a stroke of luck, but debris floated along the surface. Logs, broken branches, the remnants of human activity. One large log bobbed in the current like a submerged threat. Tom's eyes narrowed. Too close. A misjudged landing and it could pierce the fuselage, kill instantly. He adjusted the nose downward just enough to absorb the glide, feeling every ton of the aircraft react to his movements. Every micro-adjustment counted. He thought of all the crop dusters he'd flown over the years, the ones that bucked in wind, threatened by trees or power lines. Experience screamed at him, "Trust instincts, don't overcorrect." Below, passengers clung to their seats as the plane lurched. Tom could hear sobbing, murmured prayers and screams. A woman shouted, "Please, don't let us die." He swallowed hard. "Not today," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The river's bend loomed closer. He had to anticipate the change, banking slightly to align with the curve. One more gust of wind, one misjudged control input, and they would clip the riverbank. He adjusted the flaps again, holding the plane's descent rate steady. "Brace for impact," the captain finally said, voice steadier now. Somehow she had learned to trust him. Tom didn't respond. He didn't need to. The river was approaching faster than anyone wanted to accept. Trees flashed past the windows. Ice patches shimmered on the surface. The metal of the aircraft creaked and groaned under the stress. Below, a family farm came into view, barns and silos that could have ended their lives in an instant. He guided the plane just above the water, skimming over shallow banks, avoiding the trees. Time slowed. Every second stretched into eternity. The plane shuddered as the first touch of water kissed the fuselage. Tom held the yoke tight, absorbing shocks, keeping the wings level. The current tugged at the aircraft and the nose pitched slightly upward, a dangerous tendency. He adjusted subtly, countering nature with experience. Screams filled the cabin. Children cried. Adults clutched strangers. Tom felt the tension physically, a pressure he could almost taste. The fuselage scraped along debris beneath the surface, sending splinters of wood and spray into the air. Another jolt. A minor collision with submerged debris rocked the plane. Overhead bins cracked open. Luggage and personal items tumbled like cannonballs. Water seeped through the cabin, chilling everyone instantly. "Hold together," Tom muttered, voice low but fierce. "Just a little more." The river bent again. One wrong movement and they would flip. Tom's fingers burned on the controls, his arms shaking from strain. The plane listed slightly, then corrected, skimming the water like a wounded bird desperate to survive. A cabin crew member appeared in his peripheral vision, screaming instructions, trying to maintain order. The passengers obeyed where they could, gripping whatever they could find for stability. "Almost there," Tom whispered. The end of the river stretch approached, widening into a calm pool before the bend. He could see the ground approaching slowly now, but obstacles remained. Tree stumps, jagged riverbanks, and floating debris that could pierce the plane's belly. Tom held his breath. Every passenger's life depended on a combination of skill, luck, and sheer stubbornness. The plane skimmed, groaned, and then, just for a heartbeat, it felt like it wanted to glide willingly, a metal bird obeying its farmer pilot. And in that heartbeat, Tom realized something. The river had chosen. It wasn't just a patch of water, it was a lifeline offering a path when nothing else could. If he misjudged, they would die instantly. But if he trusted it, maybe, just maybe. He swallowed the fear, squared his shoulders, and prepared for the first contact that would determine life or death. Tom Carver's hands burned on the yoke as the plane approached the river's surface. The shimmering silver below seemed impossibly close, each inch a razor edge between survival and catastrophe. The fuselage groaned, vibrating with anticipation as if it, too, feared what was about to happen. "Brace, brace, brace," the captain shouted, voice cracking, almost drowned out by the screaming of passengers and the roar of wind rushing past shattered engines. Tom's heart hammered in rhythm with the trembling metal. He tightened his grip, forcing the plane's nose just slightly up, enough to absorb impact, enough to avoid smashing the fuselage into the jagged riverbanks. The first touch was violent. The belly of the aircraft struck the icy water with a metallic shriek that echoed through the cabin. The plane shuddered, vibrating through every rivet, panel, and bolt. Tom's teeth clenched. He had felt smaller planes hit water before, but never a commercial jet, never 155 souls hanging in balance. Water exploded upward, smashing against windows and walls. Spray flooded the cabin, drenching passengers instantly. Cold bit through coats and sweaters. Children wailed in terror. Adults screamed in disbelief. The roar of the rushing river drowned out most other sounds, but the metal groaning beneath them was louder than anything else, ominous, threatening, unpredictable. Tom fought to keep the wings level, nudging the yoke with every ounce of strength he had left. One side dipped too far. The river tugged at it as if it wanted to consume them, dragging the fuselage sideways. A chunk of debris, a submerged log, bounced off the wingtip, sending the plane lurching violently. People screamed. Luggage crashed down from overhead bins. The cabin erupted into chaos. The first officer shouted over the noise, panic evident in his voice. "We're spinning, we're spinning." Tom didn't respond. He couldn't. Every muscle, every nerve, every instinct screamed for perfect control. He felt the fuselage scrape along a submerged sandbar. Metal bent, groaning under the pressure. Ice-cold water splashed through gaps, soaking everyone. Yet somehow the plane continued to glide, refusing to capsize. A mother screamed as her child was thrown sideways. Tom reached over instinctively, catching the boy's arm. "Hold on," he shouted, gripping him tight until they slid safely back into the seat. Around him, flight attendants wrestled to secure others, barking orders that were half heard over screaming and alarms. The river narrowed again, a bottleneck of water lined with trees like jagged teeth. Tom's arms ached from constant adjustments, yanking and twisting the yoke, balancing weight against water, against gravity, against panic itself. The plane's nose dipped dangerously toward the icy surface. Another hit. Another lurch. Glass cracked. People yelled, clinging to the seats, praying to survive. "Stay calm," Tom barked to the cabin. "We're not done yet." Somewhere behind him, a passenger gasped and sobbed simultaneously, words lost to fear. Another slammed into the floor, knocking a briefcase into the aisle. Water rushed further in, chilling feet and ankles. The plane was slowing, yes, but the river was fighting back, tugging, pulling, testing every ounce of skill Tom possessed. The aircraft struck the first branch, half-submerged, jagged. The impact shook the fuselage violently. Seats rattled. Luggage exploded across the cabin. Screams reached a new pitch. Tom felt the plane tilt, dangerously close to capsizing. He yanked the yoke hard, muscles screaming in protest. The wings flexed dangerously, the fuselage groaned like it might tear apart. And then, just slightly, the plane leveled again. A thin line of hope flashed across his mind. They were still alive. Somehow the plane was still floating. The river had allowed it. It had chosen them for now. The next stretch was treacherous, a rapid narrowing with submerged debris. Tom held his breath, his eyes scanning for obstacles while his fingers made micro-adjustments, balancing physics, instinct, and desperation. The river surged, dragging the aircraft sideways, threatening to spin it into the banks. Another jolt sent passengers screaming. A toddler's cries pierced the chaos. Tom ducked instinctively, absorbing the shock as the fuselage scraped a submerged rock. The plane shook violently. Water surged through cracks in the doors, soaking everyone further. Tom's hands were numb, his muscles trembling from strain, but the aircraft remained upright. Miraculously, unbelievably upright. "Almost there," he whispered, voice hoarse, barely audible over the storm of screams and alarms. The river widened again, offering a brief reprieve. The plane began to float more evenly, sliding across the icy surface rather than smashing against obstacles. Tom adjusted the rudder to keep it aligned, guiding them toward a calmer stretch. The fuselage groaned and shuddered with every inch, but for the first time in minutes, the immediate threat of flipping seemed reduced. He caught a glimpse of the passengers. They were soaked, terrified, and utterly chaotic, but alive. Adults held children, strangers clung together, flight attendants shouted for order amidst utter mayhem. The metallic taste of fear was everywhere, mingling with the scent of burning wires and wet clothing. Tom felt a surge of determination. They had survived the first impact. The plane was still moving. They were still alive. And for the first time, he allowed himself a sliver of hope. But hope was dangerous. It could make you careless. He knew it. The river still had tests ahead. Narrow channels, hidden logs, submerged rocks, sharp banks. One miscalculation now would undo everything. The plane lurched again. Water surged up against the belly, sending icy sprays through cracked panels. A passenger screamed as a suitcase hit their legs. Tom gritted his teeth, forcing his arms to obey the yoke despite the numbness, despite fatigue, despite the scream of the plane around him. "Stay with me," he shouted, voice raw. "We're not done yet, not yet." Outside, the river seemed almost alive, testing them with every foot of passage. Trees reached out from the banks, jagged and relentless. Rocks lurked beneath the surface. The water tugged, trying to tip them sideways, trying to end the flight. And yet, miraculously, the plane stayed afloat, slowly, terrifyingly, inch by inch. The passengers could only hang on and pray. And Tom Carver, farmer and accidental hero, realized this was just the beginning. The river had accepted their passage, but it had not yet released them. One wrong turn, one collision with hidden debris, one misjudged angle, and it would all be over. And as the plane slid forward, scraping, shuddering, and groaning, one question hung over everyone on board. Would they make it to the calm water ahead, or was the river saving its final judgment for last? The river narrowed again, a brutal bottleneck framed by jagged banks and skeletal trees. Tom Carver's hands were numb from the yoke, arms trembling from the strain of holding a 155-passenger plane in a glide that no standard procedure could save. The fuselage groaned with every inch, each vibration threatening to tear it apart. Outside, ice-cold water churned, hiding submerged obstacles that could end everything in an instant. Passengers screamed in rising panic, some banging against the seats, others clutching strangers as though their lives depended on human proximity alone. The toddlers wailed, the mothers shouted, and the cabin smelled of fear, sweat, and wet metal. Flight attendants struggled to maintain composure, shouting instructions over the cacophony, but the terror was contagious. The plane's left wing dipped dangerously. Tom yanked back on the yoke, muscles burning, sweat stinging his eyes. The metal protested, groaning and vibrating like a wounded animal. He felt the full weight of the plane's momentum, the desperate force of gravity, and the river's relentless pull. "We're spinning," the first officer shouted, panic overtaking him. His hands shook on the controls, every instinct screaming that the aircraft would tip and roll. Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. Focus demanded every ounce of his attention. One wrong movement and they would flip like a toy in the icy current. He countered with micro-adjustments, nudging rudder and flaps in perfect synchronization, coaxing the plane into alignment with the river's narrow channel. Outside, the water roared beneath them, pulling and tugging, testing the fuselage's limits. The left wing scraped against a submerged branch, a metallic shriek splitting the air. A shower of icy spray burst through cracked windows, dousing passengers in freezing water. Shouts rose, combined with the metallic screech of stressed aluminum. Tom's stomach churned. The plane pitched slightly again, threatening to flip. He gritted his teeth, muscles screaming in protest, and yanked the yoke hard. Slowly, agonizingly, the fuselage straightened. "Hold her, keep her steady," Tom barked. "Don't fight the river, use it." The first officer followed, hands still trembling. The captain, pale but resolute, adjusted flaps as instructed. Slowly, the chaos abated slightly, though screams still rang out from passengers. They were alive, but barely, and the river wasn't done testing them. Another jolt. The plane hit a submerged rock, rocking violently side to side. Tom fought to regain control, praying they didn't roll. He could feel the fuselage bending under the pressure, every bolt threatening to give way. Water poured in through the cracked doors, soaking everyone to the bone. "Keep it level," Tom shouted. "Focus on the water, don't look anywhere else." A mother screamed as her child slipped, her hands grasping at air. Tom reached instinctively, catching the boy before he could slide. Around him, others struggled against the plane's violent motion, grasping anything stable. The river's current tugged harder. The plane spun slightly, the left wing dipping again. Tom twisted and yanked with everything he had, muscles burning, sweat blinding him. Outside, the river seemed almost alive, testing them, measuring their resolve. One more misstep and everything would end. "Almost through," Tom whispered. His words were more for himself than anyone else. Inch by inch, they navigated the river, scraping against submerged logs, dodging protruding branches, each one a potential disaster. Suddenly, a floating piece of debris, a large branch, struck the fuselage with a violent thud. The plane lurched violently. Passengers screamed, some sliding across seats. The metal groaned. Tom's heart raced, adrenaline fueling every reaction. He twisted the yoke, stabilized the plane, and held it. The first officer gasped, voice trembling. I think we made it through that section." Tom didn't answer. Relief was a dangerous temptation. The river's final twists and turns were still ahead. The plane shuddered as they passed over shallow rocks, water splashing into the cabin. A suitcase collided with a woman's leg. A man fell, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. "Keep going," Tom barked. "Almost there." The river widened slightly, a brief reprieve, but the plane's tail dipped again. Tom twisted the yoke, holding the wings level, coaxing the fuselage forward. Water surged beneath, rushing past. The plane groaned, every panel protesting the stress. Passengers screamed, clinging to anything stable. Flight attendants shouted instructions over the chaos. Tom caught a glimpse of the captain, her face pale, eyes wide, hands trembling, yet somehow still coordinating with him. She trusted him, and he could not fail. The plane lurched again. Ice-cold spray flooded the cabin. Tom adjusted flaps, nudged rudder, countered the pull of the river. The fuselage scraped against another submerged rock. Another metallic screech, another jolt. "Stay calm," he shouted. "We're still alive." They were, miraculously, but barely. The plane continued to slide forward, wounded but upright. Tom's arms burned, muscles screaming, but he refused to let go. Every inch was a battle, every second a choice between life and death. The river straightened again. A calm pool appeared ahead. Tom guided the plane toward it, adjusting continuously. The fuselage groaned with relief as if it, too, recognized the respite. Passengers clung to seats, shivering and sobbing. Tom exhaled, realizing they had survived the worst spins, the worst tests of the river. But he knew the battle wasn't over. The river had tested them, yes, but the calm water ahead was only temporary. Obstacles remained, hidden, waiting for one mistake. He glanced at the passengers, soaked, terrified, but alive. Flight attendants shouted reassurances. Children clung to parents. Adults whispered prayers. Tom swallowed hard. He had guided them through the river's first deadly gauntlet, but the final stretch, wide, treacherous, unpredictable, still awaited. One wrong move there and the miracle of survival would end. The plane creaked ominously as it floated, battered but upright, the icy water swirling beneath. Tom tightened his grip on the yoke. His pulse hammered. Every nerve screamed with exhaustion and fear. And as the aircraft slid forward, guided only by instinct, experience, and sheer determination, one thought dominated his mind. The river has tested us, but it has not yet released us. One final judgment remains. The fuselage groaned under the strain of the river's icy grip. Tom Carver's arms trembled, muscles screaming with every adjustment of the yoke, but the aircraft finally began to slow. The current, while still strong, was carrying them toward a wider, calmer stretch. The passengers, battered and terrified, began to realize they had survived the deadliest stretch of the river. Relief was immediate, but dangerously premature. Water was rising in the cabin. It seeped through cracked doors, splashed in from broken windows, and crept along the aisles, chilling everyone to the bone. Passengers were struggling, slipping, and panicking, and for some, that panic had already turned to paralysis. Tom knew that if he didn't act fast, the river would claim the plane as surely as any crash. "Evacuate, get out now," the captain shouted, her voice steadier than he expected. She had recovered enough to focus on the passengers, guiding them toward the emergency slides that now dangled into the water. Flight attendants were shouting instructions, trying to control chaos, but the terror was contagious. Tom's eyes scanned the cabin. A family was trapped near the center, water rising ankle-deep. Children clung to their parents, their little arms shaking as they tried to maintain balance. An elderly man was pinned beneath a jammed seatbelt, unable to free himself. Every second counted. "Stay calm," Tom barked, moving quickly down the aisle. "Move toward the slides, grab something stable." He reached the elderly man first, tugging at the stubborn belt. Water lapped at his boots. Ice-cold spray lashed his face. The fuselage tilted slightly to the left, throwing him off balance, but he held on. "I've got you," he said, yanking the strap free. The man gasped and clutched Tom's arm, shivering violently. A mother screamed as her toddler slipped into the aisle. Tom lunged, catching the boy mid-slide. The child's eyes were wide with terror. "Hold tight," Tom shouted, pulling him into a secure hold. Around him, passengers were moving toward the exits, some sliding, some falling, but still alive. The first officer appeared in his peripheral vision, guiding a group of terrified passengers toward the emergency slide. "We can make it," he yelled, finally finding some courage amidst the chaos. But the plane wasn't done fighting. The fuselage listed slightly, water pouring through a broken hatch. The current tugged at the plane, threatening to spin it sideways. Tom shoved the boy toward a flight attendant waiting by the slide. "Go, don't wait." He turned back to the aisle. The elderly man was still gripping him, frozen with shock. "Come on," Tom urged. "You can do it." The man's legs trembled, but with a grunt of effort, he staggered toward the slide, guided by Tom's firm hand. The river's current grabbed at the fuselage, rocking it violently, sending a spray of icy water over everyone. A teenage girl slipped, her backpack knocking her off balance. Tom dove, catching her just before she tumbled into the water. "Stay with me," he shouted. She clung to him, sobbing, as they slid toward the waiting slide. Passengers moved faster now, adrenaline pushing them past fear. Flight attendants helped wherever they could, guiding, reassuring, calming panic-stricken hands. Tom felt exhaustion clawing at him, muscles trembling, lungs burning from holding his breath and shouting over the chaos. He spotted a man trapped beneath a collapsed overhead bin. His arm was pinned, bleeding slightly. Tom moved quickly, lifting the bin just enough for the man to free himself. "Go!" he shouted, pushing him toward the slide. The river tugged harder. The fuselage tilted dangerously. Water poured in through gaps, rising past ankles, soaking clothing, chilling the passengers to the bone. Tom's hands were numb, but he didn't stop. Every movement mattered. Every second counted. He reached the last row. A mother was cradling her child, refusing to move. "We have to go, now," Tom shouted, urgency cutting through her panic. He grabbed her arm and guided them both to the slide. The child clung to him, small hands gripping tightly. The plane lurched again, tilting toward the water. Tom steadied himself, bracing against the yoke. His heart pounded in his chest. Around him, passengers were finally exiting, some clinging to one another, others slipping into the river, floating toward safety. But one more person remained, a man frozen in shock near the wing exit, unable to move. Tom sprinted, heart hammering, and grabbed him. "I've got you, now." The man's eyes widened in disbelief and then trust. They slid together down the emergency slide, landing in the icy water with a splash. Tom finally took a moment to breathe. Around him, passengers were floating toward the riverbank, exhausted but alive. Flight attendants were assisting where they could, guiding people to safety. The plane, battered and groaning, floated in the river, listing slightly, but still intact. The captain approached Tom, drenched and shivering, but eyes filled with awe. "You saved them," she whispered. "All of them." Tom shook his head. "No one gets left behind," he said, voice raw. He looked at the river, still rushing past, carrying the fuselage like a wounded animal. "It's not over yet," he muttered. The last passengers scrambled to the riverbank. Paramedics, called ahead by Alert Air Traffic Control, met them, checking for injuries, wrapping blankets around shivering bodies. Phones rang frantically. Families were reunited in tears and disbelief. 155 souls, miraculously alive. And yet, even with everyone off the plane, the fuselage groaned and creaked in the current, a reminder that survival had been fragile, miraculous, and terrifying. Tom stood in the river, shivering, soaked, exhausted, but alive. He looked back at the plane, now partially submerged, metal scratched, battered, but still whole. He had guided it to safety, guided everyone to survival, and yet the enormity of what they had endured began to sink in. For a moment the river was quiet. The chaos had subsided, leaving behind the cold, rushing water, the wrecked plane, and 155 survivors trembling on the bank. Tom realized that this was more than flying. This was life and death. This was instinct, courage, and the refusal to give up on anyone. He had been a farmer all his life, used to skimming fields, guiding machinery, and trusting his hands and mind. But now he had done something more. He had become the guardian of 155 lives. And the river, cold and relentless, had finally released them, barely, miraculously alive. The river was deceptively calm now, but Tom Carver knew better. Beneath the surface, currents twisted unpredictably, pulling at the fuselage like a predator. Most passengers had made it to the bank, some clinging to each other, some staggering in disbelief, but he knew there were still a few trapped inside. He turned back toward the plane. The water lapped at the wing, freezing cold, rising higher with every passing second. The fuselage was partially submerged, tilted slightly, and the doors nearest the tail were jammed. Panic pressed at him from all sides. The thought of leaving anyone behind was unbearable. "Anyone still in there?" Tom shouted, voice echoing across the river. Only the groaning metal and the hiss of water answered. A faint cry came from the rear cabin. A teenage girl, pinned under a fallen seat, clutched the armrest as water crept around her legs. Tom's heart pounded. "I'm coming," he yelled, stepping into the icy current. The water rose quickly to his thighs, then waist, freezing him, but he forced one foot in front of the other, moving toward the aircraft like a man possessed. The river tugged at him with every step, threatening to sweep him off balance. He reached the fuselage. slammed against the hull and pried open a jammed emergency exit. Water rushed into the opening, sending icy chills through him, but he didn't hesitate. "Hold my hand," he shouted to the girl. She gripped tightly, her small fingers barely able to wrap around his. He pulled her free, water rushing past them, tugging at both of them. Behind him, a mother screamed. Her child was wedged under a broken row of seats. Tom dove, muscles straining, and lifted the debris enough to free the boy. The child's eyes were wide with terror, lips trembling. "You're okay," Tom said, voice raw but steady. "You're coming with me." He hauled both of them toward the wing, balancing on the slick, floating metal. The current twisted, throwing the fuselage sideways, rocking them violently. Every second was a fight against nature, gravity, and the cold that bit like knives. Another scream rang out, this time from near the cockpit. A man had tried to escape through a window and was trapped halfway, limbs caught. Tom sprinted across the slippery fuselage, bracing against the wingtip for balance. "I've got you," he shouted, pulling with all his strength. The man's eyes went wide with fear, then relief as Tom yanked him free. The river tugged harder. The fuselage began to tip again, threatening to roll entirely. Tom's boots slipped on the wet metal, sending him momentarily sliding sideways. He caught himself just in time, gripping the wing strut. The plane groaned, water lapping against it like a living thing. The last few passengers were scattered. Some clung to seats, others were struggling to keep afloat in the icy water. Tom moved methodically, shouting instructions, pulling survivors free, never leaving a handhold. His body screamed in protest, muscles torn from strain, lungs burning from exertion and cold. A flight attendant appeared beside him, her face pale but determined. Together, they guided the remaining passengers to the wing, shouting over the roar of the river. "Almost there. Keep moving. Don't stop." One man panicked, trying to climb back into the fuselage. Tom grabbed his arm with iron resolve. "No, we move forward now," the man obeyed, shivering and sobbing as he climbed onto the wing. The river's current had grown stronger, threatening to pull the fuselage downstream. Tom realized the plane wouldn't remain stable for long. Every second mattered. He couldn't hesitate, couldn't rest, couldn't falter. Finally, the last passenger, a young woman clinging to a broken seat, was within reach. Tom lunged, wrapping an arm around her waist. The fuselage lurched violently, tipping slightly. For a moment, it felt like gravity itself would swallow them, but he held on. He hauled her onto the wing. All 155 passengers were now on the wing or the riverbank. Tom looked around, chest heaving, teeth chattering from the icy water, muscles trembling. The plane was now a partially submerged, twisted relic, groaning ominously as the current tugged at it. He took a step back, shivering, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. The passengers clung to each other, some crying, some laughing in disbelief, all soaked, all alive. Paramedics and rescue crews were reaching them from the riverbank, wrapping blankets around shivering survivors. The captain approached, drenched, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved them all." Tom shook his head, voice raw. "We did this together. Nobody left behind." He glanced back at the fuselage, knowing the river had tested every ounce of courage, skill, and endurance he possessed. The metal hull creaked and shifted in the icy current, a reminder of how close death had come. Emergency crews secured ropes to the wing, guiding survivors to safety. Tom finally allowed himself to step onto the riverbank. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His clothes clung to him like wet burlap, freezing him to the bone. He sank to his knees for a moment, chest heaving, letting the magnitude of what had happened wash over him. Around him, the survivors embraced, cried, and shivered. Children clung to parents. Strangers held each other. Flight attendants coordinated with paramedics, ensuring that no one was left behind. Tom felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see the captain, still dripping, still wide-eyed. You're incredible," she whispered. "I just did what had to be done," he replied, voice trembling not from fear now, but from exhaustion and relief. Behind them, the river carried the battered plane further downstream, groaning and twisting, a haunting reminder of the danger they had just escaped. Tom realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. 155 lives, alive. Miraculously, impossibly alive. He looked at the faces of the passengers. The fear, the panic, the relief, the gratitude, it was overwhelming. Each one had survived because of split-second decisions, courage, and sheer determination. And for Tom, the weight of what he had done began to sink in. This wasn't just survival. This was a miracle, a testament to instinct, experience, and the unyielding refusal to leave anyone behind. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to exhale fully. But even in relief, he knew the story wasn't over. News would spread. People would want to know who this man was, the farmer who had flown a jet to safety, who had faced death and the river and emerged victorious. But that could wait. Right now, all that mattered was that everyone had made it. They had survived. And for a man who had spent a lifetime tending fields, fixing machines, and trusting his instincts, that was more than enough. The morning sun glinted off the icy river, turning it into a ribbon of silver as emergency crews worked tirelessly along the banks. Blankets wrapped around trembling passengers. Paramedics moved quickly, assessing injuries, checking vital signs, and helping people to solid ground. The river, which had moments ago seemed like an instrument of death, now carried only whispers of its fury, as if acknowledging that it had been bested. Tom Carver stood on the riverbank, drenched, shivering, every muscle aching from exhaustion. The adrenaline was finally fatting, leaving him raw, trembling, and strangely light. He surveyed the scene, 155 passengers alive. Some clutched children, others embraced spouses or friends, tears streaming down frozen faces. Strangers hugged strangers, united by trauma and relief. Each survival was a triumph, a testament to human endurance and to the unlikeliest hero. The captain approached, still soaked, her face streaked with tears. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. You saved everyone. You saved their lives." Tom shook his head, a modest gesture that belied the storm of emotion inside him. "We all did it together," he replied quietly. "No one left behind. That's all that matters." But as the paramedics guided the last passengers to safety, Tom realized he had become the center of attention. Reporters had begun to arrive, cameras clicking, microphones thrust forward. News crews had picked up the distress call hours ago, and now the story was exploding. A farmer, literally plucked from his quiet life, had flown a commercial jet, 155 souls aboard, to survival. Sir, can you tell us what happened?" one reporter shouted. Tom, still shaking from the cold and exhaustion, struggled to answer. He looked around at the survivors, the mother clutching her child, the elderly man who had frozen under a seat, the teenage girl whose panic he had calmed mid-slide. Each face told a story. Each life told a story. And suddenly, words seemed insignificant. I just did what I had to do," Tom said finally, voice hoarse. "No one could be left behind. That's all I thought about." Cameras flashed. Notes were scribbled. Social media feeds exploded with the images. The river, the battered fuselage, the stunned passengers. Within minutes, the #FarmerSavesFlight was trending nationwide. News channels ran continuous loops of the river, the wrecked plane, and Tom standing in soaked clothes, every inch of him exhausted yet unwavering. Paramedics and rescue crews began moving passengers to waiting ambulances. The injured were tended to, while others were wrapped in blankets. Hot drinks passed around. People who had moments ago faced death now trembled in relief, clinging to life and each other. Tom helped where he could, offering hands, encouragement, or simply steady presence. Amid the chaos, a woman approached him holding a small photo of her son. He would have been gone," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved him, thank you." Tom's throat tightened. He could only nod, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Soon, law enforcement and federal investigators arrived, stepping carefully around the wreckage. They asked questions, examined the fuselage, and began collecting statements. Tom answered where necessary, detailing the glide, the approach, the river. The precision of his actions, combined with raw courage, left the investigators in awe. Hours later, helicopters circled above, capturing images of the river and the wrecked plane. News crews interviewed survivors, many still in shock. Every story echoed the same theme. The unthinkable had happened, yet everyone had survived, thanks to one man's courage and instinct. Tom's phone buzzed continuously, calls from family, friends, and media outlets. Messages flooded in from strangers, people moved to tears by his heroism. Yet through it all, Tom remained calm, almost surreal in his composure, the farmer still within him grounding every step. Finally, after the last passenger was safely transported, Tom walked along the riverbank, gazing at the twisted fuselage, partially submerged in icy water. It was a monument to both human frailty and resilience. The river had challenged them, but somehow they had prevailed. The captain approached once more, this time with a small crew of airline officials. "Tom," she said, her eyes bright with tears and admiration, "you didn't just save a flight, you saved lives, families, futures. We can't thank you enough." Tom shrugged, his modesty unwavering. "I just did what I had to do. The river chose the path, I just followed it." But the world disagreed. Within hours, Tom Carver became a household name. News anchors, social media posts, and newspaper headlines celebrated the farmer who had turned pilot, who had flown a jet with dead engines, navigated a river, and saved 155 lives. His story spread like wildfire, inspiring millions with a single truth: ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom sat quietly on a riverbank bench, wrapped in a blanket, watching emergency crews tow the wreckage downstream. Survivors laughed softly, some holding coffee or blankets, sharing stories of their ordeal. Tom listened, smiling faintly, letting their words wash over him. The adrenaline had faded, leaving exhaustion, relief, and a deep sense of purpose. A young boy approached, holding a small toy airplane. "Did you really fly it?" he asked, wide-eyed. Tom knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said gently, "and everyone made it." The boy smiled, nodding, inspired in a way only children could be. Tom realized that this quiet moment, this shared human connection, was the true reward. The headlines, the fame, the accolades, they were temporary. But the lives saved, the gratitude, the relief in every eye, those were forever. As darkness settled over the river, Tom Carver stood and surveyed the scene one last time. The fuselage, battered and bruised, reflected the fading light like a steel monument to survival. Emergency crews had done their work. Passengers were safe. Families were reunited. The impossible had been made real. And Tom, farmer, pilot, and hero, finally allowed himself a smile. He had faced death, fought the river, and emerged not only unbroken but victorious. In the end, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about people, life, survival, and that truth, simple, profound, unshakable, was more than enough. The river whispered behind him, calm now, as if acknowledging the courage it had witnessed. Tom turned, walking toward the waiting crowd of survivors and rescuers, his heart full, his body aching, and his spirit unbroken. For the farmer who had become a hero, the world would remember the story forever. 155 on board, both engines dead, and a man who refused to let anyone die.